Hey guys, what's up? This is Bharat. You're watching iGyaan. In today's episode of Texplicit, we talk about how India is obsessed with cheap technology and how it might end up being a problem for smartphone companies. So let's quickly get started. Now, India as a market has always been obsessed with cheaper things. We've always enjoyed cheap technology, cheaper cars, and cheaper things in general. We want to get the best value for our money, and that also comes down to the average income of an average individual. Now, things have changed in the past couple of years, but the mindset towards technology has not changed that much. In the beginning of the smartphone era, there were only a few flagship companies that launched only a few flagship devices. Companies like Apple, Samsung, HTC, LG only had a few phones to offer, and most of them were either completely cheap feature phones or completely expensive smartphones. There was a big void in the market that needed to be filled, and smartphone technology needed to become cheaper, which is when companies like Micromax, Lava, and Carbon managed to bring Chinese technology and Chinese smartphones to the Indian market, bringing them at a much cheaper price in comparison to what was already available in the market. Now, the sub 14,000 price bracket has been the largest price bracket for smartphones and feature phones in our country for the longest time. When feature phones were available at that time, they owned 70% of the market share alongside smartphones. And then eventually feature phones started to phase out. In 2019, they still accounted for about 30% of the entire market, even though phones under the 14,000 rupee price bracket continued to account for upwards of 80% of the entire smartphone market. Another reason that Indians are obsessed with cheap technology is that they aspire to have a better life. The aspiration allows them to want better things, but the average income doesn't allow them to have and purchase expensive things. Hence, cheaper technology comes to the rescue, where if you can get the most out of your money, then that technology becomes the best available option for you, and then it continues to help you achieve your goal of a better life. Let's talk about Xiaomi. Now, Xiaomi has typically launched cheaper phones in the market. They launched with their Mi series in the beginning. The Mi 3 was one of their first devices to come to India. However, that wasn't a cheap device. It was priced upwards of 20,000 rupees, and it wasn't in the biggest price category. Also, a lot of people were not wanting to choose the Xiaomi device over several other devices that were already available in the market, and hence Xiaomi had to come up with a cheaper alternative for markets like India, and the Redmi series was born. Now, Redmi series initially was a really expensive device to manufacture for the company. They used machined metal shells and expensive Gorilla Glass bodies to form devices that were sold under the 14,000 rupee price bracket, which was the largest price bracket for the country. Now, making these phones allowed Xiaomi to not only take over the smartphone market, but also become the #1 vendor for phones in the country. But there was a massive cost to pay for the company as well. They were constantly selling these phones lesser than at a profit, and they had to offset their balance by selling services and advertisements in their user interface. Now, this troubles a lot of people, but the understanding here is that hardware is really expensive, and researching and developing hardware costs a lot of money. Now, Xiaomi's managed to sell devices under this price bracket for a long time, releasing newer phones year after year and competing in a very aggressive price band, but they still continue to offer better and better products. And they're also now able to sell products in the offline market at the same price, which would typically require a 30 to 35% markup for distribution and offline sales. Like I mentioned, the company's only been able to do that due to their offset of hardware costs by selling services and advertisements, and that has led to a lot of confusion in the consumer's mind. Now, when you buy cheap technology, there are a lot of compromises to be made. For example, you may not get advanced features like water resistance and dust protection on your smartphones, and also devices may not perform the way they're supposed to because of the use of cheap or compromised parts. In certain cases, technology always trickles down from the most expensive technology to the cheapest technology. If you look at cars, a few years back, only really expensive cars had features like power steering, power windows, and even automatic transmissions. But today you can find all of those features in the cheapest possible car available in the market. And that is purely because of the advancement of technology. When an expensive device or an expensive technology is researched and consumers go out and buy it, the sheer number of these products sold allow for the technology to eventually become cheaper, and then allow for the manufacturer to go and develop something new that can also then eventually become cheaper. So the evolution of technology continues only if people continue to buy expensive devices. But there's also something that you lose out when you go for cheaper technology. Marketing allows companies to sell their cheap products, heightened and looking premium and performing the best in a price bracket that typically shouldn't be able to do that. And that leads to a big difference in expectation and reality. When you go out to buy a phone that you want to buy for example, gaming, and you purchase that device, but it isn't a gaming-centric phone and it isn't supposed to be a high-performance phone, and then when you purchase it and get it, it doesn't give you the performance that you expect from it, and that leads to a big failure in reality. And that is where you start to lose interest in technology and understanding why this cheap product doesn't offer you that experience, and you start to blame the manufacturer. And that is where the problem for the manufacturer begins. Now, Xiaomi is another big example of this. Xiaomi recently launched the Mi 10 in the Indian market. They haven't been launching their Mi series in the Indian market for a very long time, and that has led to a brand perception of a cheap smartphone manufacturer. Xiaomi is considered a smartphone company that can launch phones up to 20,000 rupees, and that is fine. But the minute they start to cross the 30,000-40,000 rupee price bracket, they become too expensive or overpriced. And then in the mindset of the consumer, you cannot buy a Xiaomi device which is priced upwards of 50,000 rupees, as is the case with the Mi 10, despite it being a flagship product from the company in the Mi series, which has done very well globally. As a consumer, one must understand that expensive technology is what leads to cheaper technology becoming better. And only if sales of expensive technology continues to grow is when cheaper technology will continue to evolve. It is because of investments and research and development in the most expensive side of the market that the cheaper side of the market gets better upgrades and better features. And this leads to what is a happy market. The consumer is the winner, because if you are a consumer who's able and willing to buy expensive things, you have those things available to you. And if you're a consumer who's able and willing to buy only moderately expensive or cheap technology, those options are available to you as well. And at the end of it, the consumer does win. There is a lot of hate for things that are overpriced, and this word is used quite a lot, especially in India, but price is really relative to the consumer who is purchasing this product. And the features of that technology, although may not be apparent to a consumer who thinks that the other product is overpriced, the features may make sense to someone who's willing to shell out the money for that product. The biggest example for this is the Apple iPhone. The Apple iPhone is considered to be one of the most expensive devices, and also Apple technology in general is considered to be overpriced. But it was Apple that allowed for the smartphone companies to exist today. It was Apple who pushed for capacitive screens, and the first iPhone was what allowed for finger-based touch systems to become a common man's dream. And hence, Apple's technology has often been what has trickled down to other smartphone makers. And an Apple consumer may not consider Apple devices overpriced, but for a lot of other people, Apple devices may be overpriced because they may offer features that may not be useful to an average consumer. It is very relative to the consumer's mindset, and also very relative to the marketing that the manufacturer will do. But at the end of it, it is important for companies to exist in all price brackets, simply because it leads to evolution of technology. And it is also important for companies like Xiaomi, who have sort of gotten stuck in an area where they need to get out of. They need to remove advertisements from their user interface, but they can only do that if they start selling phones that are actually profitable for them. And that is where the problem lies, and that is for what we need to find a solution, and we need to do it quick. If you enjoyed this episode of Texplicit, don't forget to smash the like button and hit the subscribe button if you're not already a part of Team iGyaan. Don't forget to take part in our giveaway. It's ongoing. Click the link in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.